listening to the Becoming More Me podcast with me, Teresa Lear Levine. You're already enough. But if you're anything like me, you thrive when you're stretching and developing yourself, creating more of the person you feel called to be. This podcast is here to inspire and support you. Let's release the negative, reinforce the positive, and elevate our vibe together as we tap into our limitless potential to transform and grow. Hey, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of the Becoming More Me podcast. I'm pretty excited. I've got a fun guest here today, something a little bit different, but still very much in alignment with things that we do to become more of who we want to be in this world. So my guest today is Susan Meier, and she's awesome. We met a few months ago, and I've had the pleasure of getting to know her. We had a little virtual coffee chat a few weeks back, and it just seemed natural to invite her on here today as a way of just welcoming more ways that we like to become who we want to be and how we want to show up in this world. So she is a personal branding expert who helps women untangle these zigzags of their careers to locate the clear thread of their story and design those next steps of their professional journey. For more than 20 years, Susan's helped Fortune 500 companies define brand strategy and create distinctive messaging. She uses these tools along with what she's learned on her own zigzag career path across business, art, and parenting to empower women to craft their personal brand and discover a roadmap toward a life of purpose. Susan's an alum of Harvard Business School and the Boston Consulting Group, and this brilliant and beautiful woman is on a mission to empower professional women to own their stories and unlock their promise. I'm so happy you're here today, Susan. Welcome.
Me too. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. So can you start by just sharing a little bit about your life, like your family, where you live, whatever other cool things you have going on during this current season of your life?
Sure thing. And I really love your notion and the way you articulate the idea of becoming more you, because I do think that's kind of the best way of describing the journey of life that we're on, right? Like you figure out who you are little by little, and it unfolds as you experiment with things. So my story, I live in Manhattan in New York. I have a husband and 3 children who live with me. I run my branding business from home, and I have done that since way before the pandemic. And so that is where I'm sitting today. I work, like you said, with large companies and also with individuals. And the work that I do with individuals is so gratifying for that very reason that we were just saying, of, helping other women along their journey to discover what makes them uniquely them and put it to work in whatever way they want to. And a big part of that is like, how do you tell your story? Because that can be kind of challenging.
Oh, absolutely. And I would definitely want to talk about that because, it fascinates me on the level of being an ADHD creative who's also, I feel like sometimes it's a little hard to find the right parts of my story to pull out. And that I would assume is part of untangling that zigzag a little bit. And I know that in there somewhere, as everything we need is already within ourselves, in there somewhere is always the right anecdote or way to convey or relate something. But sometimes I have a little bit of a hard time putting a finger on it when I need to pull it out. So how do you help people with this whole like zigzag path? I don't know, coach me or talk more generally here, but as I'm rebranding and becoming more visible on podcasts and writing and all that kind of stuff, like what's the value of this zigzag path?
Yeah. So, and it's interesting, even as you asked me that question and I answered it in such a high level way. I think part of it is you don't have to tell all of your story in the first sentence when you meet someone. And I think that was definitely a learning and also a practicing doing that for me for a long time. So I'll tell you a little bit more about my story and some of my challenges that I see reflected in a lot of the people that I work with. And I know that you share this too. People who are engaged in the world and curious and interesting and creative often do more than just one thing, right? Like they're not just, I'm interested in coding, or I'm a rock climber, you're all these different things. And so I actually studied visual art in my undergrad, art and art history. And I did internships in auction houses and museums. And I was very much in that kind of creative world. And then I got a job with the Boston Consulting Group, which is a completely different world, which turned out to also really interest me. And I love doing strategy work. I love talk about untangling threads. For me, that's very much what strategy is about, right? Like you in a consulting environment, your client comes to you with an objective or an issue they're grappling with, and then they throw you like every deck they've ever made, and you're kind of reading through all this disjointed material, and your job is to sort of figure out what's important in there to help them solve whatever issue it is that they have. Now, that discipline is not something that you usually find an artist going to work doing. And so for years, I was back and forth between like, okay, that's what I do for my job. And there are a lot of parts of it that I really enjoy. But I also, when I talk about doing that, leave out a whole other part of myself that's really important to me and is very much who I am, which is this artistic side. And I thought for a long time that I kind of had to hide that part when I was in like business settings, because it would make me less credible or sound flighty or just raise questions that I didn't know how to answer. Like, are you when I was younger, especially, like, are you actually qualified to do this job? You're not an economics major. And part of that is just getting older and being more confident, but part of it is actually sitting down to think about how do the parts of your story not only coexist, but actually inform each other. And so that's the work that I do, with the women who come to me, thinking about, first, we start off with that, thinking about yourself and what are all those bits and pieces that are important to you, that make you uniquely you. What are the values actually that led you to those things? Because that's something a little bit different. So for example, two of my core values are beauty and freedom, and knowing those two things help me unlock like why I made the choices I've made so far. Freedom, that makes a lot of sense for why I ended up actually running my own business instead of being an employee. And beauty, of course, is, well, that explains why I actually love, crazily enough, making those PowerPoint decks and making them beautiful. And it's not just a way of conveying information quickly, but envisioning information in a compelling way. And that's something that I help my corporate clients do in a very differentiated way. When they go out and present their materials to whoever they're communicating with, they can do it in a very beautiful an impactful visual way. And so it turns out that that's a differentiator for me in that part of my business, and not at all a drawback for client, big Fortune 500 companies, right? And they're looking for somebody who's smart and strategic, but they actually like working with somebody who's also very visual. So that's an example of how those two things come together in a way that I didn't expect. And in fact, I spent a lot of time apologizing for or hiding. And it turns out that they are relevant. So whatever your bits and pieces are, even if they seem sort of unlikely together, if you do some of that digging, you will get to the place where they actually do intersect and make sense together.
Yeah, I'm sure there's a lot of people that are using things as disqualifiers that actually qualify them on a whole different level.
Yes, exactly. And then the other piece of it is thinking, it boils down to empathy, right? Like, who are you actually communicating with? Are you at a cocktail party where you're trying to meet people who might be, people who hire you to do the work that you want to do? Are you sitting at a meeting where, maybe there's somebody who has an open board seat that you might be interested in sitting on? Or are you looking for new clients for your coaching business? And so you're just sort of chatting with anyone at any time, and need sort of a casual way to explain what it is that you do in a way that might resonate with people. Thinking about who those people are that you're talking to and what their world is all about is often as important as thinking what you're all about. And frankly, it's nice to let other people talk about themselves and learn who they are, and not just, constantly sort of saying, oh, here I am, I'm on stage, let me tell you all about me. So bringing those two things together is really the key to crafting that kind of narrative, that story of who you are.
What kinds of things do you look at when you're working with someone or with a business in order to kind of get that whole picture and be able to pull the things out that make a difference?
So, I mean, I have a whole toolkit that I've developed, and there's, 12 potential tools that I use with people that kind of fall into those three categories. One is understanding who you are. One is understanding, the second category is understanding who those audiences, let's call them, are. And then the third is putting that all together. In particular, if you're asking about the who are you communicating to piece, for example, I have people collage portraits of the various people they think they might want to be communicating with. So you really like walk a mile in their shoes. Like, what do they do? Not just kind of, oh, they're looking to hire a graphic designer, but who are they? Like, what's their whole world about? So you really step into, out of yourself and into them, just as one example. And I think that I also use a lot of tools, because I'm an artist. I use a lot of tools that involve visual elements. And I find that when you do something like collaging, for example, and you're just using pictures, and, of course, I let people use words if they can't find a picture that resonates. But when you're explaining to me why you chose the picture you chose, a whole new world opens up that's very different from if I just asked you to sort of write me a Word document of who you think your audience is or what you think your motivators are, that kind of thing.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. I hadn't thought about some of it in that way. And so the picture's coming together for people and you're pulling this stuff out for them. And then how do they use it going forward? Like, you've located what it is that is like their thing, or that really encapsulates what they want to project out there. Then what?
So we usually start, before we do any of that work, by understanding, sometimes people have a very specific goal, like I'm going to, create a website, right? Or I'm starting a new business. Or it may be as simple as, I don't know what to write on my LinkedIn page in the overview piece. But figuring out if people have very specific kind of deliverables, then we will work to those. But oftentimes people don't have that yet, even in mind. Often they're not even sure if they're starting a business or looking for a job or what it is that they're doing. They just are coming with a blank slate. And I always say, actually, the blank slate is the right way to start. Even if you do have those specific goals, let's honor those and acknowledge those, but come back to the blank slate. And then there's a few things that we're always going to do in terms of so-called deliverables. So there will always come out of the end of this process a tight sort of 1 or 2 sentence, what you might call an elevator pitch. You don't need to use it in an elevator, but you know what I'm saying. Those kind of couple of lines that you can use in almost any context to introduce yourself in a way that doesn't give your whole life story, but explains who you are in a memorable way that's like a little different from how anyone else might introduce themselves. And that, I find, is the biggest thing that people kind of benefit from when they walk away from the process. They can then use that on their LinkedIn or their website or however. And that process in particular really forces you to, again, integrate those things that are unique about you, because usually when you write it out as a first draft, it sounds a little generic, right? Like, I'm a strategic thinker who brings problem-solving skills and 20 years of experience in the healthcare space. Okay, well, that's great. And we need to know all those things about you, but like, what's going to make me remember you when I meet you? So that process, I think, is the real culmination of the work. But you also walk away with, what if you're, for example, designing a website, because we do so much visual work, you're going to walk away with an idea of what colors you're going to use on that website and what kind of photography style makes sense for you. So there's also that component.
That's really cool. And then everything starts to come together. And really, I've never really felt like all of my stuff ended up at that matchy place at the end. It's always, I feel like I move and transform so quickly sometimes that it's hard to keep up with where I want to be. And to catch up to that sometimes. But that sounds like a really great place to get to. And it also sounds like there's a lot of a lot of things that people overlook creatively about like how their career path all kind of brings them to the place where they are right now. I know you have a lot of thoughts about like happiness and success and things like that, and how to make like better sense of maybe what you've done so far, what you've accomplished, and leverage that for future decisions. So I'd love to hear a little bit about that.
Yeah, just as an example, as you were talking, I was thinking about a client of mine who she started the process in really a blank slate phase. Super accomplished, very educated, has had a lot of interesting roles in business and finance and consulting, but took a big chunk of time off to really mainly parent. But of course, because she is an engaged and interesting person, she was doing a lot of other things that weren't paid things, but they were leadership roles. And so she was presenting to our workshop group, kind of the bits and pieces of me part. And she said, I feel a little silly saying this, but the most exciting and engaging thing I've been doing is leading this running club. And it turns out she had sort of been a founding member of this small women's running club, which turned into a really big group of people. And the leadership of that club had thought about ways to use it as, not just a networking tool, but a real empowerment tool. Mm-hmm. And you could just tell from the way that she was speaking about it, that it was something that was so dear to her heart. And also, that she was just very, very engaged with. And this was in a workshop where there were other women also kind of giving her feedback as well as mine. And we all had the same idea. And she was sort of, why are you discounting this as a leadership role? This is, on your so-called resume, this belongs on your resume, even though you didn't get paid for it. And by the way, it's probably a big clue to what's important about you. And then as we did more work, it turns out empowering women is a big part of her story and her brand. Building community is a big part. Challenging yourself, which, if you're in a running club trying to run a marathon, that's a lot about challenging yourself. And those threads, you could find them all the way back to the stuff she was doing in high school and college, and why she does those first few jobs, and now what she's looking for. But it's her running club. She hadn't even thought about it as.
Well, we discount so many of those things for reasons that women come to work with me. Hey, the worthiness stuff about like, oh, well, it doesn't count if I don't get paid to do it, or if it doesn't have a certificate attached to it or a degree or whatever, then it's not a qualification, or all those kind of things that are just our beliefs and that kind of stuff that's bubbling under the surface and subconscious, but that really shows up in our day to day and keeps us from bringing that stuff to the table and counting it.
Exactly. So a big part of my process, and I know of your process, is figuring out what are those things that are holding us back. And once you give voice to what those are, they kind of evaporate.
Yeah.
Not actually that hard to let go of them, but you got to name them first and see them first.
Yeah, absolutely. That's awesome. It sounds like it's quite the process, and it really encompasses a lot when you're working with someone or with a business. And what do you think the importance is of getting feedback as you go? Like for somebody that may be doing this alone or doing it with someone like you, for kind of determining that zone of genius and everything else?
It's so important. And I think that, especially women, for some reason, underestimate our value. And then getting that feedback, like this happens to me over and over again with clients. One of the exercises we do is I have them go ask at least 5 people that know them or have known them well professionally to do a few things like, describe them in adjectives and give them a testimonial and that sort of thing. And almost all of them come back and say, I can't believe how nice they were. First of all, that they even responded to my email, right? Comes as a surprise. We think, oh, I'm asking this big, important person to do me this favor, and I'm sure they don't have time. And just that first piece of feedback, like they do have time for you and they're actually really excited to support you on your journey, is powerful. Then the second thing is hearing this positive feedback from people that you have, touched their lives in a meaningful way is powerful. And then the third thing is like, now let's get into specifics. Oh, that's interesting that, well, for me, one was that I shared with you when I finally, and by the way, it took me way too long to do this, given that this is what I do for a living, but to do this exercise for myself.
But if you hadn't been through it on your own, you wouldn't be able to help other people with it in the way that
right?
you do. So it's all in alignment.
I really get it. Because I've been there. I know how kind of hard this is. And hearing feedback from clients to say, I really appreciate the visual quality of the work that you do. And that realizing that they weren't just hiring me because I'd gone to business school or worked for a consulting firm that they'd heard of, right? That they were actually hiring me in equal parts for that. And also because I come to it as an artist was a huge learning. And so sometimes it's the adjectives, sometimes it's like some key insight like that, like, oh, that's why people work with me. Oh, it turns out that other thing I did that I thought didn't count is actually the thing that makes me different and, makes me interesting to people. So ask for feedback early and often, and it doesn't have to be a big drama. It can be as easy as reminding yourself after each project to just ask for a quick testimonial, or if you're just kind of starting out on, I'm not sure what I'm doing with my life next, just pop an email out to 5 or 10 people and say, like, what was your experience like working with me? Or how would you describe me?
Yeah, that is really helpful. So if you have a client that's collecting that kind of information, do they kind of hand it over to you and say, what do I do with this?
Yeah. So, so I work with clients in a couple different formats. One is in the group workshop piece. So in that forum, I actually have everybody present and then each person gives feedback. And I typically do the ask for feedback piece alongside the piece where you do a collage about yourself and what are all the parts of you. And so you start to then see side by side, here's what I think of me and here's what other people think of me. And people are always surprised by how much resonance those two things have with each other. And it also like creates a very complete picture. I also work with people on a one-on-one basis, either over the course of multiple calls or in a one-day power boot camp workshop, multiple hours. So the format is a little bit different, but always we're connecting those kind of, what do I think and what do they think? And I've never had it be the case that those two things were unrelated. It just starts to put the story. We do that early in the process and it just starts to spark the story of who you are. And I think it also gives people that reassurance and confidence that I'm not just writing like a made up bedtime story about myself. This is real because other people see it too.
Gotcha. And then is there any effort placed on like elevating the parts that other people aren't seeing, or do you work mainly with bringing out the stuff that is kind of like seen in both places?
I gotta tell you, that does not happen very often. I feel like what the surprise is to my clients is that other people do see them very accurately and very positively. I haven't really had a situation where somebody goes, oh, like, they are missing a whole part of me that I think is really important. It's more the opposite. Like they're actually seeing more of me than I realized.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Very cool. Where can people find more of this? Where can people find more of you?
So my website is susanmeierstudio.com. That's the name of my business. And Meier is spelled M-E-I-E-R. I know there's a lot of different ways to spell that last name. And so on there, you'll see that there's a page for corporate clients, and then there's a page for personal branding. So if you're interested in this type of work, go on the personal branding page. You'll see the different, as I kind of touched on, different ways to work with me. And there's also a little gift for those of you who would like to download it. I've got a quick start guide there for 5 things you can do right now to start building the career that makes you happy.
That's awesome. Definitely go check that out, everyone. I will make sure I have all of that information in the show notes. So if you don't remember it, just go, you can click over there in the show notes. And before we wrap up, I would love it if maybe you could give the listeners some tips or some easy ways that they can be more creative and more productive in their daily work life.
Ooh, I love that question. So there's an internal mindset piece to that, and then there's an external, totally practical piece to that. And I'll give an example of each one. So the internal mindset piece is, I think the encapsulating thought is just like, take the stakes down a little bit, like lower the stakes, lower the stress level, and inject a little bit of play into whatever you're doing. I think we take ourselves very seriously a lot of times, because we want to deliver the very best work that we're doing. And sometimes that actually holds us back from being creative. So just take a breath, do the thing that you're doing as if you're not going to be delivering it to anyone, and allow it to be a little bit more playful. You can always come back to it and edit it and change it. But 9 times out of 10, you're going to find that silly, playful first draft is actually way better than the one you would create if you were trying to get it perfect the first time.
Yeah, this is pretty much the exact same advice I would give somebody trying to put together a round of emotional freedom techniques too.
I love that. I love it.
Feel it, get creative with it, put it out there, tap on it. You're going to feel better. If that doesn't work, we can structure it a little bit more, but it probably will.
And then some of the external bits, I wonder if you use some of these too, but and I've
been a lot of similarities, I guess, is what I'm getting at.
Yeah.
In the way that I do things, but very different things that we're working on.
Yeah. But, surround yourself with plants, have plenty of natural light. These things they seem insignificant, but they actually do. And there's like actual academic research on this. Yep. They help you be more creative, putting yourself in the right space, having a private space to work, which, can sometimes feel like a luxury, is very, very important. And valuing your own time and space is the start of that, in order to say, yes, what I'm doing is worthwhile. It's worth having a door that closes, a nice little plant on my desk, a window, and some time and space to do the work.
Yeah, every bit of that affects your energy and the frequency at which you are, vibrating into the universe, which means what you're attracting and bringing into your life. All of it matters so much. Those are great tips. I love it. And I'm so glad that we were able to get together and bring this to the listeners today. I know they're going to love it. And I know I learned some things that I can apply to my own branding and all the projects that I'm working on right now to get things a little bit more cohesive. And I really appreciate it, Susan.
Thank you. This was fun. Thanks for having me.
It was my pleasure. And thank you, everybody, for tuning in today to Becoming More Me. Thanks so much for listening. If you loved this episode, please share it with a friend or post on social media and tag me so I can personally connect and thank you. Until next time, keep taking bold and brave action steps towards becoming more of who you want to be in this world. You are capable, you are worthy, and you are enough. Keep shining your light.